To fully grasp the benefits of the OPzone Connect system, a basic understanding of the autonomic nervous system and how the stresses can affect your autonomic nervous system and how you can actually measure these stresses on your body is really essential. So we're going to start out by having an overview of the central nervous system, or the nervous system as a whole. As you can see from here, the nervous system is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, of course, is all the nerves that reach out from your central nervous system, from the brain and spinal cord. Focus for today is really on the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system can be divided into three major branches. The somatic nervous system, which is what you learn a lot about in your personal training courses, because that really is the neuromuscular system. It's the afferent and the efferent, or the motor and the sensory nerves, which we very much have control over. Then you have the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system really relates to the gastrointestinal system. Focus for today is, as we said at the beginning, the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, if you look at that word autonomic, what does auto mean? Auto kind of implies automatic, but it also means self-regulating or unconscious or subconscious. So if you were to fall unconscious, two of the areas that your ANS controls are your heart rate and your breathing. Falling unconscious doesn't mean that you stop breathing, and doesn't mean your heart stops as well. So you have self-regulating or automatic control of those two structures of the body. The ANS can again be subdivided into the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The main drives there, really, the sympathetic nervous system innovates or sort of excites you, and the parasympathetic nervous system calms you down. Okay? That's a general overview of the nervous system. Now, if we look at this basic schematic, all we're going to look at really is the branches of those nerves and where they emanate from the spine. Because as I said, the peripheral nervous system reaches out from the central nervous system, so it's all coming from your brain. So the nerves of the autonomic nervous system, divided into the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, reach out from different parts of the spinal cord. If you look at the parasympathetic for a start, you can see it reaches out from the cranium, also extends all the way down and comes out at the level of the sacrum. Whereas the sympathetic nerves originate again from the brain, but they reach out or they exit at the level of the thoracic or the lumbar areas, throughout the thoracic and the lumbar spine. If we look at a little bit more detail of the actions of those sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the peripheral nervous system, or the ANS, you can see that they reach into many organs. They reach into the lungs, we've already established that. They reach into the heart, but they also reach into the digestive system. They reach into your liver, into your kidneys, into your sex organs, as you can see here. Also, they're involved in your skin and regulation of body temperature. So there's a few areas that we really want to focus on today in terms of the ANS function. So that's a good overall view, but let's go into a little bit more detail. So on this next slide, we can see the general functionings and the effects of the ANS. As we said at the beginning, the sympathetic nervous system is kind of your excitatory system. It prepares you for what we call the fight or flight scenario. And this is something that all personal trainers have heard of. But we'll look again in a lot more detail about how the SNS does stimulate your fight or flight responses. So fight or flight then, to defend the body against imminent attack. PNS does exactly the opposite. Okay, it calms you down. So once you've been attacked or once you've had to run, your PNS system allows you to recover. It allows you to rest. But it's also involved in digestion processes. So sometimes we call it rest and digest. Sometimes rest and recovery, recuperate and digest. It's all of those calming, recovering, digesting type processes. So allows you to heal, regenerate and nourish the body. The overall effect then of the sympathetic nervous system is what we call a catabolic effect. It breaks tissues down, whereas a parasympathetic, because it's involved in the recovery and regeneration, it's involved in building up, or anabolic. And again, we'll look at the hormones that are involved in those two systems in just a minute. So, organs that are activated by the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. As we said, when you exercise or when you get stressed, what happens to your heart rate? It increases. Your respiration increases. So those are the first two that we're going to look at there. Heart rate and respiration centers are stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system. Muscles become primed and ready to be activated. Your pancreas releases glucagon. Okay, and we'll talk again a little bit more about the hormones in just a second. Thyroid hormone activated and your adrenal glands activated. Again, glands relating to hormones, that's the next section. Parasympathetic nervous system, all of those organs are really digestion related organs. The liver, the kidneys, the pancreas producing insulin, the spleen, the stomach, small intestine and colon. So that's very much your digestive process that are controlled by the PNS. Hormones and chemicals. Adrenaline is a term that most personal trainers are familiar with. Noradrenaline, maybe not so much, but they're both produced by the adrenal glands, specifically by the adrenal medulla. Now, the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal glands to release adrenaline into the body. So what does adrenaline do? Two of the things that we know that it does do is increases heart rate and increases your respiration rate. But it does a lot more than that. And this ties in very much with, I suppose in terms of the catabolic effects of the sympathetic nervous system. Adrenaline stimulates the fat cells to release to the blood supply. Because again, remember, sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight part of the ANS. So, what is fat used for in the body? Well, it's used for energy. Now, when you experience a stressor, especially in prehistoric times, your body and your brain doesn't know whether you need energy for 5 seconds or for 5 hours. So it will try and raise your fat levels in your blood to be used as an energy source, and it will do the same thing with sugar. So what it's trying to do is give you energy for the activity that you've been stimulated for. Okay, so adrenaline stimulates the fat cells to elevate in the blood. Adrenaline also has a direct effect on the liver. And as you'll know, liver is one of your primary storage sites for glycogen. We store glycogen within the muscles and within the liver. So, with the stimulation of the adrenal glands producing adrenaline, it stimulates the liver to break down glycogen into your basic carbohydrates, into glucose. So what that does is releases glucose into the blood, elevates the blood sugar levels, allowing you to have energy for the exercise that you're about to do. So adrenaline, fantastic. It's a stress hormone, but it's a very appropriate stress hormone, as all of these stress hormones are. This whole group of hormones here, adrenaline, noradrenaline, glucagon, and cortisol, are all called stress hormones. Glucagon has a direct effect on glycogen within the liver, and that's really the only effect that it has in terms of raising your blood sugar level. So it breaks down the glycogen, releases sugar into the blood, so you have again that energy for the exercise that's coming. Cortisol. Now cortisol is an interesting hormone in the respect that it's been somewhat maligned in the industry. Everyone says, oh, cortisol, that's a really negative hormone. It's not. It's just a stress hormone, and it was designed in prehistoric times when we needed energy. Okay, what it really does is it's involved in raising your blood sugar levels. So it has that same effect on the liver. It breaks down glycogen to raise your blood sugar levels, but it's also involved in what's called gluconeogenesis. Genesis meaning the creation of, gluconeogenesis, the creation of blood sugar. Now, how does it do that? What it does, it targets often the muscle cells. It can target anything. It can target fat, but it will target protein as well. So the protein can be broken down into its constituent amino acids. The amino acids will then be released into the blood supply, taken to the liver. The nitrogen component of the amino acid is taken off, and all you're left with is your carbon skeleton, which is basically blood sugar, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is what you're left with when you take away nitrogen from protein. So By breaking down muscle tissue into its constituent amino acids, taking it to the liver will convert those amino acids into blood sugar. Again, why? Why do we do that? So that we have energy for that activity. Now that's fine short term. The problem is obviously long term. If you've got constant physical, psychological, or whatever stresses, and your body is producing excessive amounts of cortisol, that's when we understand that concept of catabolism and the fact that excessively high cortisol will cause your body tissues to break down. And that's the biggest problem, and that's when we know that it's catabolic. Okay. Looking at the positive side, the parasympathetic side, or the recovery side, we got hormones like insulin. Insulin does exactly the opposite of glucagon. It's produced by the pancreas, and it stimulates your muscle cells to open up, and you'll be familiar with this from your personal training courses. Stimulates the muscle cells to be opened up so that sugar can actually flow in. It's interesting, it doesn't just open the door for sugar, it also opens the door for any amino acids that are floating, which is kind of cool, and that kind of ties in with the anabolic effect. Insulin is considered a very anabolic hormone. So sugar goes into the muscle so it can be used for energy, and amino acids go in so that it can be used for resynthesizing the muscle tissue that you might have broken down when you're doing the exercise. DHEA it's actually a prohormone. It's produced in the adrenal glands. It may be one that you're familiar with or not. It's a precursor to your steroid hormones. Steroid is not that scary term. It's just basically testosterone and estrogen that you produce in your body. Obviously men producing more testosterone, women producing more estrogen. So if your body is stimulated to produce more DHEA, it can actually channel it towards production of testosterone or channel it towards the production of estrogen, males and females. And again, those are your anabolic hormones. They're your recovery hormones. So this happens after exercise, when you're not stressed. So that's all the recovery systems. So DHEA converted to your steroid hormones, very, very anabolic. Body functions that are activated by the sympathetic nervous system then. Obviously, blood pressure elevates as your heart rate goes up, cardiac output goes up, your blood pressure is going to go up as well. Increases blood sugar, as we've already elaborated, and increases heat production. All of these things prime you ready for the activity that you're about to do. Your body doesn't know that you may be sitting in an office and your boss may be shouting at you, and that's causing your SNS to be activated. It's just a primal response from prehistoric times. Your body perceives it as a threat, and it gives you enough energy to be able to do the exercise that it thinks that you need to do, fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system activates digestion, elimination, and immunity. Immunity is phenomenally complex, or the immune system is phenomenally complex. And you may well know that either when you've been really stressed and you go on holiday, or often the case when your clients are really stressed and they go on holiday, the very first day of their holiday, they become sick. Why is that? Okay, well, let's have a little look at what the PNS and the SNS do. The sympathetic nervous system stimulates what's called your innate immune system, or it's your first line of defense. Whereas your parasympathetic stimulates your acquired immune system, your T cells and your B cells and your antibody and things like that. So, if you're very stressed and you become very SNS dominant, but your PNS is down here, then your PNS has not allowed your acquired immune system to be activated. So you get this suppression of your acquired immune system. But because your SNS is up here, you've still got that first line of defense. And these are cells like natural killer cells, monocytes, macrophages that are flowing around the blood, ready to attack any bacteria that's coming in. So, if you're highly stressed, you've still got your innate first line of defense. But when you go on holiday, what happens? Well, your stress levels go down, your first line of defense goes down, and it takes a long time before your acquired immune system comes back up again. So your first day of holiday, where are you? Your acquired immune system is down here, your innate immune system is down here, you've got no lines of defense. That's why you become sick. Quite interesting. Okay, psychological qualities then. Sympathetic nervous system is stimulated by emotions. So fear, anger, and aggressiveness. These are really your primal responses, and again it goes back to prehistoric times where all of those emotions will elicit that stress response, which is really appropriate because the only stresses we had were really physical stresses back then. So we had to, fight or run away from a predator. So guilt, sadness, and willfulness are what we often call the modern malady, the emotions that have come with modern day time. But the problem with that is they still stimulate exactly the same response to the SNS. So you can have the fear, but you can also have the sadness, and you get the same SNS response. Sympathetic nervous system, calmness, contentment, and relaxation. All these one things, and they help cover. It's like meditation, yoga, tai chi, body balance, deep breathing, all those type of things stimulate that calmness, which in turn stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So factors again that cause the activation. Exercise, of course, is going to cause your body to get excited. So it stimulates the SNS. Stress, fear, worry, what's sometimes called stinking thinking, or those really negative thoughts, they'll activate the sympathetic nervous system. To activate the PNS, rest, sleep, meditation, relaxation therapies, paced breathing, and emotional contentment. All of those calming things stimulate a calming response to the body, not surprisingly. SNS dominance, PNS dominance. What happens if you push your exercise too far? We do know, if you look at this performance arousal curve, for every individual and for every activity, there is an ideal arousal level to create optimum performance. For example, if you're a snooker player or an archer or a darts player, you don't want to be hyped up. So, in terms of your arousal performance curve, your optimal arousal is going to be way back here to give you that optimal performance. Whereas if you're a sprinter, a power athlete, a league player, you really need to be kind of hyped up. So again, your arousal curve will be somewhere over here to give you that optimal performance. If you go beyond that optimal arousal, you'll have a performance decrement, which again your coach is not going to be very happy about. But if we think about what you're doing with your clients, yes, they're not going to be able to push as hard, but they're also more likely to get injured because of that performance decrement. So if you have excessive arousal, they are more likely to get injured. So just keep that in mind as we go through the next section on overtraining, because that is more a chronic effect of doing that repeatedly. So this next chart really looks at the overtraining paradigm. If you do this consistently, as I said, if you train your clients and you push them hard, and a lot of clients do like to be pushed hard, if you train them hard frequently, then that overexcitation and that overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system doesn't allow the parasympathetic nervous system to rebound and cause full recovery if you're doing it too frequently. And what really determines that are two things: the intensity of the exercise that you give and the volume of the exercise. And you combine high intensity and high volume, and your SNS is going to be way up here. And it takes quite a long time before your PNS gets activated after high intensity exercise. In fact, studies have shown that it can take as long as 2 days after intense high volume training before the PNS really kicks in enough for you to get full recovery from the activity the day before. So again, if you're training your client, or even if they're training only with you 3 times a week, but they're coming into the gym every day, their body, their physiological systems may not have time to completely recover. Now, you know that whole concept of overtraining, pushing your body too hard, mechanical overtraining. But there's also chemical overtraining, psychological overtraining, physiological, neurological overtraining, neuroendocrine overtraining. All of these systems are interlinked. If you push too hard, all of these systems will start to malfunction. And we can actually, interesting enough, measure it through the autonomic nervous system, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit later. So, overreaching is like your acute overtraining. If you're not allowing enough recovery time, if you've got a normal PNS, but you're not allowing enough recovery time, then your body hasn't fully completed the anabolic processes. Now, women, don't be worried about anabolic steroids. All we're talking about there is recovery. And most women want to maintain muscle tone. If you don't do it, if you don't give enough time for recovery, or if your PNS is not activated enough, your muscles won't have recovered enough for you to be able to work out hard enough on the next training session. So, inability to recover can also come from a depressed parasympathetic nervous system. There is what we would call an interdependence between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. As you exercise, your SNS goes up and your PNS goes down. As we said, after exercise, it should reverse. Okay? But they're not absolutely 100% dependent. Okay? Overreaching is a bit of a concern because it means your body is not recovering. But if you allow maybe a week's holiday, and we often call it exercise holidays with our clients, you know if your clients, if their performance is going down, it's just like, okay, take a week off, come back to me, and I'll bet you'll feel a lot better when you do come back. And invariably that does happen, unless they're so stressed that they become sick in that week, you know, and as we said, that sometimes does happen. So overreaching can be recovered from after just taking an extra few days. Where it becomes serious is where it gets to the point of what we call overtraining. Overtraining can require weeks, if not months, if not up to a year to fully recover from. Now let's talk about the effect of overtraining on your ANS. As you're pushing yourself excessively, your sympathetic nervous system is way up here, your PNS is down here, you're training very frequently, and you're in this constant state. SNS up here, PNS, okay, after the exercise it may come down a little bit. It never comes down enough to get PNS dominance to get full recovery. So if you do this consistently, apart from the fact that your muscle tissues are going to be broken down, all of the systems in your body will start to perform incorrectly. So in what we call traditional overtraining, and this often happens with athletes, sympathetic nervous system really overworked, but mainly from the physical stress of exercise. And I'm not saying that athletes don't have mental and emotional stresses, but they have such great physical stresses because they're professional athletes, so they're putting their body under a lot of physical stress every day. So again, that causes this major rise in the SNS and a depletion in the PNS. So you become very catabolic as opposed to allowing your body to recover after exercise. So that's what we call traditional overtraining. Most of your clients are not professional athletes. In fact, I would pretty well guarantee that you have very few professional athletes because they have their professional sports coaches. The clients that you're training with don't only have the physical stresses that you provide for them, or that they may provide for themselves as weekend warriors as well, but they also have the stresses of work. And those stresses of work obviously affect the brain. And because maybe they're doing a 12 or 14 hour day, not only do they have the stresses of work, maybe they got the stresses at home as well, because husband or wife is nagging them for not being at home enough, so they got the emotional stresses as well. So in addition to the physical stresses you're providing them, you've got these cognitive and emotional stresses. And as we said earlier, thinking, that stinking thinking, and all the negative stuff, the emotions, they tie in with your sympathetic nervous system in exactly the same way as the physical stresses do. So, in addition to what they already have in their life, those cognitive and emotional stresses, you're then throwing on a physical stress. Is that a good thing? Probably not. You'll know that with some of your clients, when they've had a really bad day in the office or they've just had an argument with their wife, they'll come in and just say, look mate, just work me really hard. I just need to be put on the boxing bags, throwing kettlebells around, just need a really hard workout. And immediately after their workout they say, oh thanks mate, I feel so much better. And that's actually because of the production of another hormone, the hormone endorphin. And we often, historically we've said endorphin is really more cardiovascularly generated, but now we know that if you do intense and high volume training, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, your body will actually produce this hormone and it makes you feel really good. But then you've got this duck analogy of feeling really calm on the surface, but underneath your legs are doing this. Okay? And that's exactly what's happening physiologically. All of your SNS system has been stimulated and you've gone into complete catabolism. So what you've done is you've thrown physical stress on top of cognitive and emotional stress, and as much as psychologically they feel good, their body has gone straight into catabolism. So if you're SNS dominant for a long period of time, it puts a stress on the body. Apart from all the internal organs, etc., the glands that are responsible for producing those hormones will start to burn out. Your adrenal glands will start to burn out. So remember, your adrenal glands produce adrenaline and noradrenaline, and they stimulate a lot of the metabolic processes in the body. They raise your heart rate, they cause your respiration to increase, they stimulate fat release and carbohydrate release. So if you push somebody consistently or they experience stress for really, really extended periods of time, whether it's physical, cognitive and emotional, or all three of those, it can lead to what we call burnout. And that is partly psychological, but very largely to do with your adrenal glands. It's called adrenal burnout. So what does that do to your system? If your body is not producing adrenaline, your SNS goes from being exceptionally elevated to dropping all the way down. Your PNS is still way down here because you've been overworking, you haven't given enough time to recover. So when you're SNS dominant, you tend to be PNS low chronically. What happens when your SNS comes down? Does your PNS automatically rebound? Well, no, it doesn't, because your PNS will often respond to SNS activation. And as you know, when you exercise, SNS goes up. After exercise, PNS goes up. If you're hyper stressed and burned out and you've got adrenal failure, SNS never elevates, so your PNS doesn't come up as a consequence. Okay? That is obviously a very, very serious condition when you can get no activation in SNS and no activation in PNS. When your client gets to that point of burnout, that's when they need months, if not a year, to fully recover from this exercise, because they basically destroyed their SNS and PNS. Okay, very, very serious condition. So hopefully you will never get to that stage with your clients. How do we know whether we're getting to that stage with our clients? Yes, you know that there's a performance decrement, but that could just be a one-off thing. There is a way of monitoring or measuring the autonomic nervous system, and this is what we're going to go into now. How do we measure the autonomic nervous system? Now that we know that it's so important, how can we measure the branches of the autonomic nervous system? Well, traditionally and historically, we've only been able to use a couple of different ways. One is by every time they come into the gym, you give them a 100-question questionnaire. And they talk about their emotions and they talk about their digestive system and whether they have a dry mouth, etc. And that's very subjective, and it's also very time consuming, and it's very impractical. It wastes time at the beginning of a session. And as I said, it's very subjective, so there's no objectivity there. The other way, of course, is going to a doctor and having a blood test. Because, as we said, if you become excessively stressed for a long period of time, your body produces cortisol. And that's what the doctor will test. They'll test cortisol levels in your blood and they'll say, yes, you are highly stressed. Thank you, doctor, I needed to know that. Okay, because you kind of subjectively know that anyway. So going to a doctor, again, it's invasive having a blood test, and it's expensive. And it's you've got to go to the doctor. So impractical. Both of those techniques are pretty well impractical. Fortunately, as we said, the autonomic nervous system, one of the areas that it impacts mostly is your heart. It has a direct impact on your heart. Your SNS causes an elevation in your heart rate, and your PNS causes a decrease in your heart rate. This is where the concept of heart rate variability comes in. At rest, if you use a heart rate monitor, 60 beats per minute, 60 beats per minute, 60 beats per minute, looks very, very consistent, because what that heart rate monitor does is averages out 3 or 5 beats prior, and it averages it. So you don't get this. But if you looked at it beat per beat and you're a healthy person, there should be this variation in your heart rate. There should be an increase and a decrease every beat. That's called heart rate variability. If you look at this graph here, and you look at these 3 beats, this is an ECG reading. So you've got your PQRST curve, and what we're looking at here is the period between those 2 R spikes. And you'll notice all 3 of those have got different periods of time. So all 3 of those reflect a different heart rate. The term heart rate variability and the studies of heart rate variability started about 40 years ago, back in the 60s. Variability, the term flexibility is actually, I think we're adopting flexibility a little bit more than variability now, because flexibility implies flexibility of your body to adapt to whatever's coming in, to any stresses, any thoughts that are coming through your head. Because the important thing is, as a thought comes into your head, it will stimulate either your sympathetic nervous system or your parasympathetic nervous system, and your body will respond appropriately. And it should happen all the time, because never through your life do you not have a thought that's going through your head. So, SNS, you get a positive thought or an exciting thought or a negative thought, it causes a peak. You get a calming thought and it causes a drop. All of these thoughts that are going in and out of your head will cause these variations in the R to R period. Okay? That is healthy. If you don't have any variation in that R to R period, it's an indication that you have ill health. It means that your SNS and your PNS are not working together. If you're highly stressed, your SNS becomes very dominant and it sends a real drive to your heart rate. And apart from increasing your heart rate, it doesn't really allow your PNS to work. So you don't have those positive effects coming through. So you have that very, very consistent heart rate. That's an indicator, your SNS dominant, which is an indicator, as we said, it's a catabolic. It affects all of the systems of your body. It's a negative thing. We should be having a certain amount of heart rate variability in between every consecutive beat. So, if we extrapolate this down onto a graph, we can then look at that R to R interval. And between each beat, you should see that period there is a little bit lower. It goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. That's what we're looking for. Heart rate variability. Healthy. High heart rate variability means healthy. Remember that. If we look at this graph, this is looking over about a 2 or 3 minute period. And you notice it's not a smooth curve. It's a very jagged curve. But let's look at that sort of undulations first. When you breathe in, your diaphragm is being stimulated by your SNS, your sympathetic nervous system, to contract. SNS, of course, is stimulating your heart as well. So the stimulation for breathing in causes your heart rate to go up a little bit. And when you relax and your diaphragm relaxes, PNS becomes dominant and your heart rate comes down. So superimposed on this graph, that's exactly what you're seeing. That's not what we're concerned about though. We're concerned about the jagged nature of this curve. If it is jagged, that's a good thing because it means your brain is responding to every stimulus that's coming through. So SNS and PNS are working with each other to cause those small fluctuations, the interbeat variations in heart rate. That's what we're looking for. That's healthy. Now, I could look at this graph and go, okay, that's jagged. Looks good. Okay, but how good is it? How bad is it? Is my SNS working really well? My PNS working really well? I can't, just by looking at that graph, I can't tell you that. Looks pretty good. So what mathematicians have done is they've taken a graph like this and used an algorithm to look at the power of your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. Mathematically, it's incredibly complex, but what you come out with is a graph that looks something like this, where in your low frequency power, that reflects activation of your sympathetic nervous system. In the high frequency power, that reflects activation of your parasympathetic nervous system. So if you look at this example here, this person is a little bit activated in their SNS and a little bit underactivated in their PNS. So historically, what we've used is an electrocardiogram or electrocardiograph. And as you can see from this little graph underneath here, what we're looking at is those R to R intervals, as we've already elaborated on. Using ECG, you've got to plug loads of electrodes over the body. It's pretty invasive. You've got to go to the doctor. It's expensive. It's accurate. It's certainly accurate because you've got 5,000 samples that you're taking per second. But again, how practical is it to go to the doctor every time you're feeling a little bit stressed? Okay? It's a good recommendation if you're highly stressed, go to the doctor. But on a daily basis, you're not going to be going to visit the doctor. So with an ECG, we have the full sinus rhythm here. So you've got the PQ-RST curve. But all we really need to know is that R to R period. So as all we need to do is measure that interpulse period, we can use a very simple tool called a PPG. By attaching this to your ear, what it does is sends an infrared light into your microvasculature of your blood supply and measures that pulse. And what that gives you is really that RR interval, or that interpulse interval. That's all we need. We don't need this complex ECG, because that's all we're looking at, RR interval, or the interpulse period. So plugging this PPG into your laptop and using the OPzone Connect software, you can actually measure the amount of heart rate variability. And as we said, that's a direct indicator of how your autonomic nervous system is working, whether you're PNS dominant or SNS dominant. So again, this tool can actually be used for guiding your clients into tuning in to how they really feel. If they go on here and they're not necessarily feeling that stressed, and then they notice that they're very SNS dominant, it's connecting with yourself physiologically. The great thing doesn't just say, okay, well, you're SNS dominant or PNS dominant. It gives you a layman's term explanation of where you're at. And it doesn't just give you a snapshot report. It gives you a trend, so you can see if your client is getting excessively stressed, and it will actually interpret that trend and give you recommendations, or give recommendations to you as the trainer. So it's a simple tool that has a direct measure of your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and with the software, it's in layman's enough terms that your clients can understand it, and you, of course, can adjust the training appropriately. And again, this is not just about adjusting the training on that one day. If you're looking at a trend and seeing, ooh, SNS is going up, maybe they need to take just a few days off, or maybe you need to restructure their training for a week or two. Because again, Your clients don't want to get injured for a start, but they want to get the best out of their results. And that's really what this tool is for, is to enable your clients to get the most out of their training. Prior to this, it's all been subjective or going to the doctor. We didn't really know how the autonomic nervous system was working. Now we do, and we have to use this as a tool to be able to adjust the training with the clients appropriately. So, in closing, I'd just like to summarize what we've gone through today, what we've covered today. Parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, the activation of them is a true reflection of what's going on in your body and your body's response to the stresses that it's receiving. Heart rate variability is a direct way of measuring the activation of the sympathetic and the nervous and parasympathetic nervous systems. So, in my eyes, what we have here with the OPzone Connect system is the missing part of the puzzle, or the part that has been missing. We've relied on intuition, we've relied on incredibly complex systems. Now we have a simple and direct measure of what our client is going through on a daily basis, and we can adjust the training accordingly to maximize the results of their training. That's what we want from our clients. That's what our clients want from us.